thanks for being here. And you have the source sheets in the chat. And yeah, please. Okay, let's begin. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to start. Hi, hello to all of you too. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. So let's start. I sort of basically we're going to go through several different kind of ways of thinking about kashrut, about sort of the laws of kashrut, 4 different approaches to kashrut, 4 different interpretations of what these laws might mean, and so the first one is what I call kashrut as a spiritual practice. This is as is found in the Sifra. Sifra is the halachic midrash on Vayikra, on Leviticus, which quotes Rabbi Wolkenfeld, who says, a person shouldn't say, yuck, I don't want to eat pork. I don't want to, right? You shouldn't say that. Right? These things are all gross to me. You shouldn't say that. Why? Rather, you should say, hello, rather, you should say, it's very possible for me to do all these things, but my Father in heaven has decreed against it. In other words, okay, so these are not, there's no value in not wanting to violate these prohibitions. You're supposed to, these are normal human desires. These are normal, things. And you're supposed to say, it's very possible for me to do it, but Avisha Hashem Gazar Lai, my Father in heaven forbid. How do we know? You have to, because the Torah says, and I will separate you from the nations to be mine. In other words, we separate ourselves from what other people do, and therefore we have this special relationship with God. So it's not about I don't want to, or I can't, or it's gross to me. You see those Red Lobster commercials on YouTube. You're not supposed to go, you say, yum, okay? Looks great, looks yummy, okay? But Avisha is right, because our life, my Father in heaven has decreed against it, I can't eat it, okay?
It's interesting that it says Gazara Laikach. It didn't say kept it from me, said I can't do it. He chose this path instead of the other path. Meaning it's not that I want something I can't have it. It's that, I have to do whatever God says.
Correct.
That's the direction he chose.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's there's a decree against it. I'm not going to do it. Okay. And so this is picked up by the Rambam. The Rambam in Shmona Prakim. Rambam wrote Shmona Prakim was an incredible, really worthwhile essay of the Rambam. I read it when I was 18. I haven't read it since, but I really should. It's really great. It's really, really good. The whole thing is really good. He wrote he was very young. Rambam wrote a introduction to he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. I think he was maybe a teenager when he finished his first draft, a Arabic commentary on the Mishnah. Still that, and he revised it later in life, but I think his first draft, he was a teenager when he finished. It's still a very influential, important commentary on the Mishnah. It's been translated to Hebrew 1,000 years ago. 800 years ago. He then, in the context of his introduction to the Mishnah, he has 3 places where he writes expansive introductions, where he deals with broad topics of either Jewish history or Jewish philosophy. So in beginning to Seder Zrayim, the beginning to the entire Mishnah, he writes a whole history about what is the Mishnah, what's the oral Torah and Revelation, and that's very important, okay? Introduction to 8th parak of the 8th parak of Sanhedrin. He has a whole introduction to faith and do we take stories in the Talmud literally or figuratively, and what does it mean to be a believing Jew, and what does it mean to be a heretic? And this is where he develops and describes the 13 famous 13 principles of faith. That's where he actually writes them out in his introduction to the 8th chapter of Sanhedrin. And then his introduction to Pirkei Avot, he writes a whole treatise on Jewish ethics. And he's trying here in this essay, so that's called Shmona, it's 8 chapters, Shmona Prakim. So, but they're like standalone. You can get them as standalone little booklets. And there's a relatively new edition that with a new translation straight from the Arabic into Hebrew that was done relatively recently. And it's in English too. So in Shmona Prakim, he writes his essay on ethics, and he tries to reconcile the Greek and the Jewish concept of ethics, and which in English we would call the different continence and virtue. Continence, self-control, that's Elazar ben Azariah, which he says this is the classic Jewish approach. If she aval ma'asot avisha v'shem gazar alai. Okay, I want to eat these things, but my Father in heaven said they're forbidden. I'm not going to eat them. So the Jewish path is, Kasha's, this the spiritual discipline of Judaism is very much self-control, whereas the Greek focus on virtue is about becoming the type of person who wants to do the right thing. Aristotle, develops this famous. Okay, that's virtue. Right. So the Jewish is like self-control versus virtue, and the Rambam. I'm going to share the source sheet again for those who joined late. The Rambam, he reconciles those by saying it depends on the type of mitzvah. There's certain types of mitzvah where self-control is praiseworthy because those mitzvah have no like rational end per se. And there are other mitzvah where virtue should be embraced because there is like a rational element. Let's see what his language. Okay, he says, contemplate the sages' wisdom, peace be upon them, in their choice of analogies. Oh, very good. For they do not say, a person should not say, it's impossible for me to kill someone, it's impossible for me to steal, it's impossible for me to lie, but what can I do, etc. Instead, he brings only non-rational mitzvah, meat and milk, wearing shatnez, forbidden sexual unions. Okay, so the Rambam divides. There are certain mitzvot where you really shouldn't want to violate them, right? You'd be very worried if someone said, I could totally, if it wasn't forbidden in the Torah, I would kill you right now, right? That's not the goal, right? That you'd be very alarmed if somebody said that, right? Even though Elizabeth Azari does say, we are supposed to say, yum, lobster, yum, bacon, but I can't eat it because my Father in heaven forbid me. So there's different types of mitzvot. Certain types of mitzvot we strive for virtue. Certain types of mitzvot, we strive for self-control because there's no virtue in not wanting to eat bacon. Yes.
Small, noticing that Elizabeth Azari mentions Chazir and the Rambam chooses Basar Kalim.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. That I don't think is significant, but that's notable. Like the examples of the Sifra and the rest could be a different version of the Sifra. It could be. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, but what's interesting is that the Elizabeth Azariah says Eve Shilavo El Ha'erva. Oh, sorry, no, that's the same. He puts that the same way. Yeah, that's what I just want to put that out. That is actually very significant. He puts forbidden sexual relations in the category of forbidden foods, as opposed to the category of stealing and murder and things like that. So it's not about ethics. It's not about, I would divide them into different categories, but fundamentally, forbidden sexual unions for Elizabeth Azari and for the Rambam are more akin to kashrut than they are to murder and stealing and things like that. Right. There's no right. Yeah. Like not wanting to violate them, not like that kind of cultivating that virtue is not doesn't seem to be an approach. I would say maybe the different, maybe the different kind, you could divide them into different, whatever, but that is really noteworthy, I think. Different topic, but noteworthy all the same. Okay. Any other comments on this? Let's see, Rambam continues and says more. It's source 3. And this, that the Torah forbids some things and forbid others, is for the following reason: in order to remove one from extremes, for forbidding the forbidden foods, and the prohibition against certain sexual relationships, and the prohibition against prostitution, and the obligation to marry through betrothal and a ketubah. And even then, a man's wife is not always permissible to him; rather, she's forbidden during nida and for 7 days after and following childbirth. Then the rabbis further limited sex and warned against sex during the day. All of this is to distance one from the extreme of physical indulgence, in order to set in our souls the characteristic of restraint. So Rambam says the whole point is just to have limits. And so we live lives with lots of limits placed on us. We can't indulge everything we want. So we should want to do lots of things that we can't do. And so the Torah comes and gives us limits, and that's what refines our character, not the thing itself, which is, it's almost random, right? God could have told us to, this is kosher and this is treif, or he could have reversed it. It doesn't really matter. The point is we have limits.
Not in itself sounds weak.
Because say more. Yeah, right, it's cultivating. The virtue is to be a disciplined person, right? That's true. But we're still, but it only works if we don't want to do the thing, right? If we don't want to, yeah. Oh wow, thank you. Oh, there's other people joining. Okay, I'm sharing. I'm not sure it's necessary, but every time someone is joining, I'm sharing this source sheet again. So, okay. Part 2.
It is necessary.
It is necessary. Great. So I did it again. All right. Thanks. It's great to see all names here. Okay. Okay. It's part 2. Now, so the first. Okay. So that's first idea. Kashrut as spiritual practice, the spiritual practice meaning being cultivating self-control and self-restraint. Part 2, kashrut is a moral force. Okay, this is okay. So ve'et ela tishaktu min ha'of lo yechelu sheket heim et haneshiv et haperes ve'et ani. Here's the pasuk to this whole section in Leviticus 11. You shall not. And these you shall have in detestation. Ve'et ela tishaktu among the birds, should not be eaten. Okay, they are detestable things. Okay, the vulture, the bearded vulture, and the osprey. Okay, these birds of prey. So the Ramban says, what's the main siman? Let's sort of take a step back. The Ramban notes, this is very, very, not just the Ramban, the Torah doesn't tell us, when it comes to fish and it comes to animals, the Torah tells us the simanim, the signs of a kosher species and non-kosher. When it comes to birds, the Torah just gives us lists. And we sort of left for us to figure out what those simanim are. The Gemara identified simanim of kosher birds. There are anatomical simanim of kosher birds. Later in the 16th century thereabouts, we stopped relying so much on those simanim, and we started switching only eating birds that, in addition to the simanim, we also have a tradition that a Jewish community ate those birds. Turkey kind of snuck in right under the wire. And some people don't eat turkey, right? It was a controversial bird, but stuck it right on the wire. It has all the semen. It looks, as you know, as I assume you know, once you take off the feathers, it looks just like a big chicken. So it has all the simanim, but it does not know Jews did not eat turkey, before 1492. Anyway, so the simanims, what are the simanim of the simanim of a kosher bird? It has a etzbiater, it has a fourth, 3 toes in front, 1 in the back.
Opposable thumb.
Not opposable thumb, not a thumb, like a little thing in the back. Like think of a chicken foot. It has 3 in the front, 1 in the back. As opposed to, if you've ever seen an interview of a parakeet or something, right? Or an eagle, for example, they have 2 and 2 that they kind of grasp. They have talons for grasping and picking it, right? Versus the kosher ones just have 3 in front, 1 in the back. It has a crop that's a certain type, part of its digestive system. It has a gizzard that you can peel by hand. Korkava niklaf biyad in Hebrew, a gizzard that could be peeled. I have peeled a chicken gizzard. It is you can do it. It's a little gizzard is like an organ that so and there's something else which I can't think of right now. In any event, the signs of the non-kosher birds, they're dores, they're birds of prey. It's actually interesting. I don't want to go too far afield, but there's a whole vast halakhic literature on various varieties of chickens, because every so often a new chicken breed would be introduced to whatever corner of Europe, and there would be post-game who would say, "Is this a kosher chicken or not? This chicken is a doe race. It's a bird of prey. This is a fierce chicken. This is a So it's not that chickens are omnivores. They do eat they will eat anything. They will even other chickens, right? But they have the extra. They have the gizzard. They have the korkovan. And the zekef, the crop. They have the 3 toes in front and 1 in the back. They have all the signs of a kosher bird. But indeed, there were chickens introduced to various places in Europe. The new breed, the Cochin chicken, and brought to London in 1804. Whatever it was. Various varieties of chickens that have been that raised some halachic suspicion that they were a little bit too fierce. And
how does the rule of having Masor pertain to new breeds? Because all
a very good question. Yeah,
all chickens are domesticated.
It's a very good question. How far? Yeah. So it's a little bit of a judgment call. There is what you would do is there's a guy, Rabbi Wolkenfeld is the guy at the OU. He's the bird expert at the OU. I did a workshop with him, so I sort of know more about this than is normal. But he would get sent. He gets sent. Like a shochet in Uruguay would send him a quail and say, "This is the type of quail that we have here in Uruguay. Is a kosher." So he would observe its life cycle and put it in a enclosure with other quails, and does it hang out with the quails or does it not? And then they would bring it to some posek. It used to be Rabelski at the OU, whoever Minister Schechter now, and they would render a verdict. There's a type of chicken called a silky chicken. It has black skin. It has very kind of fluffy feathers. So that was one that he really wanted to have declared kosher, and they brought it to.
They're very docile.
Yeah, so I think that people generally don't eat them. I don't think, but you can, I guess. But so I think the 2 of the senior rabbis at OU, they met at they met at the Yeshiva University, which shares a campus with a boys' high school. And they were in this room. They had the chicken on the table. They were like rather staring at this chicken, and they opened the door, and there was like a kid who was like cutting class, and they dragged him into the room, and they said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's a rabbit." and they said, "All right, get out of here." And they said, and I think that's not kosher. It's not chicken. It looks too strange. Not good. But there's a vast literature on the various breeds of chickens. There's one last story about there was a Rav Hutner brought. Rav Hutner, Rav Aaron Cutler, who founded the yeshiva in Lakewood, the first like kind of Lithuanian style, one of the first Lithuanian style yeshivas in America, off in the wilds of New Jersey, which now is like a big Jewish metropolis. So he brought some students of his to a shochet to like have chicken, to see a chicken being slaughtered, and he saw the chicken, and it was like a 1950 American chicken, was a different breed than what he was accustomed to seeing in Lithuania in 1935. And he said to the shochet, "You call this a chicken?" And the shochet turned to him and pointed at the students he had brought with him and said, "You call these yeshiva students?" Anyway. Okay, that was fun. Okay, so anyway, the Ramban says, "Siman Gedos." What's the main siman of a non-kosher bird? It's cruelty, and its blood becomes heated due to its cruelty, and it's dark and thick, which gives rise to that bitter fluid in the body, which is mostly black and tends to make the heart cruel. So this is like a medieval, physiology, four humors, whatever. So something in the bird, like the aggression of the bird, leads to some sort of aggressive tendencies in people who eat them. So if we eat birds of prey, we will become aggressive. That's basically what the Ramban thinks, and that's why the Torah prohibits birds of prey. Next, Leviticus 17, which talks about you can't eat blood, basically. Okay, that's Leviticus 17. Okay, 10 to 16. So the Ramban here says, and on page 3, you have the Ramban in English. It's proper for to explain the reason for the prohibition against eating blood by saying that God created all lower creatures for the purpose of man, since only he amongst all of them recognizes his creator. Nonetheless, he did not at first permit man to eat anything except for vegetation, but no living creatures at all, just as it is stated in the chapter of creation, which says, "Behold, I've given you every herb, yielding seed, etc., for food." Okay, this is like his Ramban's so a whole history of food. Okay, first, we were meant to be, even though the whole world was given over to us, we weren't allowed to eat animals. Then, when the flood came and they were saved by the merit of Noach, and he brought offerings from them to God, which were acceptable for him, he gave man permission to slaughter and eat them. Just he said, "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, as the green herb have I given you all." Okay, so it makes a certain, since Noah saved all the animals, in turn we get to eat them. That's the trade-off. Okay, that seems fair, right? Since their existence was because of man, thus he permitted man to use their bodies for his benefit and needs, and because their life was on account of man's sake, and that their soul should be used for man's atonement when offering them up before him, blessed be he, but not to eat it, since one creature possessed of a soul is not to eat another creature with a soul, for all souls belong to God. The life of man, just the life of the animal, are all his. Even one thing happens to them, as the one dies, so dies the other. Yea, they all have one breath. Kohelet. Okay, so it's the bodies of the animal. We save the bodies of the animals on the ark, so people get to eat animal bodies. But the blood, which is the life force, which is the soul of the animal, that comes from God. We don't doesn't belong to us. So when we offer a korban, the blood is placed on the mizbeach, on the altar, and if we're eating something not for a korban, we can't eat the blood. So that also is seems sort of linked, right? This is one piece of laws of kashrut. We don't eat blood, and that is reflecting this, again, kind of this ethical perspective, which does, like, the life of the animal, or the animal's body belongs to us, the physical life of the animal belongs to us, but there's some life force that God gave to this animal, and that was never ours. That's not ours to take, and we honor that by not eating the blood. Next, Deuteronomy 14. Also lists kosher species. That's the second time. So the Ramban here says, this is source 9. The purpose of this mitzvah is connected with the following prohibition: thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk, although it's not an abhorrent food, for both meat and milk are permitted separately. He prohibited it because we are to be holy in choice of foods, or because we ourselves are holy, that we not become a cruel people that is not compassionate, by milking the mother and extracting its milk to boil therein its kid. Okay, so Ramban, so that's another. So the Basra Challah for Ramban is about, again, we shouldn't become cruel people by doing this cruel thing to be, boil a kid in its own mother's milk, which is kind of
How did that become all milk and all meat to not be together?
So so the Torah says it 3 times, and so we expand it. There's a joke where it's like a famous. I'm going to ruin the joke, but it says 3 times. It says lo tevashal gedi b'chelev yimo, and Chazal understood that to mean there's a biblical prohibition against cooking them together, eating them when they've been cooked together, and then deriving benefit from them if they've been cooked together. That's the which means that cheeseburger isn't necessarily to rights of prohibition if they're not cooked together, right? But do that as it is, okay. But so that's how Chazal understood the repetition 3 times. The joke is that God says to Moshe, "Lo tivashal gedi b'chelev yimo," and Moshe says, "Oh, you mean I'm supposed to not eat any dairy and meat that's cooked together?" And God says, "No, lo tivashal gedi b'chelev yimo." Oh, you're also not supposed to. There's a separate prohibition against the cooking. He says, "Lo tivashal gedi b'chelev yimo." Oh, there's also a benefit prohibition. And God gives up. Okay, so that's the. This is like it's like a 300-year-old joke. That's like a. So this is no, really. I think this joke appears in kind of early Enlightenment critiques of Rabbinic Judaism. It's like an old joke.
But Becca's question is still a real question, right? Like, wait, why do I assume that this goat cheese that I bought is related to this chicken meat that I had, right? Like they're different species, and I live in a post-industrial world where I'm really clear that they're completely not.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like the cow's milk you buy in the supermarket is no connection to the beef that you buy in the same supermarket. I guess it's different farms, different breeds of cow anyway. Yeah. They're not, it's totally different. Fine, you're right. So I would say even if you'd ask the Ramban, you'd say, but that rationale isn't really relevant to us anymore. It's okay. It's not, but that's why so okay. It's still in the Torah. The Torah legislates for all time, and here's the rationale, here's why, here's what it was helping to teach us. Maybe it doesn't teach us, maybe it can still teach us that symbolically, right? It can still, every time we have hopefully we can, maybe that would be the lesson would be that when we have our whatever, like our blue sponge and our red sponge, and we have this label sticker on my, my Tupperware, and I'm, I should have in mind, actually, the point of all this is I should be a compassionate person, and I should respect motherhood, and I should respect the parent-child relationship in all its permutations, and I should, honor families and whatever it might be, or just,
even when they screw up kosher,
even when your kids put the wrong fork in the thing, yes, you still should love it. Exactly, right, exactly. Okay. So we're jumping to source 10. This is the Rambam, okay, in the guide. I say to not to eat any of the various kinds of food that the law has forbidden us is blameworthy. Among all these foods that are forbidden to us, only pork and fat may be imagined not to be harmful. Like, everyone knows that eating shellfish is gross and harmful, and everyone knows that, etc. But pork, some people think it's healthy, but this is not so. For pork is more humid than is proper, and contains much superfluous matter. Again, medieval physiology. The main reason why the law abhors it is it's being very dirty and feeding on dirty things. To what extent the law insists upon the need to remove filth out of sight, even the field and in a military camp, right? And the army, Torah says, when you go off, the army who's after war have to bring a shovel, right? Everything has to be clean. And even the more so within cities now, if swine were used for food, if people actually ate pigs, marketplaces and even houses would have been dirtier than latrines, as may be seen at present in the country of the Franks. Okay. All right. Oof. All right. Little dig there, the Rava. Okay. So just what would happen, right? What would happen? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The Rambam lived in a Muslim environment his whole life. So he thinks he had a very stereotype of the Christian France as being a dirty place where they eat pigs, and everything is filled with mud and dirt. The Barbanel, who was more sort of more worldly man, lived sometime later. And Barbanel, he was the advisor, right, to Isabel and Ferdinand until they expelled the Jews, and he had to leave, and then he ended up in Italy where he wrote his books. But so he says, we see before our eyes that the nations that eat the flesh of the abominable swine and the rodent and other birds and animals and forbidden fish are all living today in a state of strength and there's not a tired or weak man among them. So he says, no, it's not true. It's just not true. Okay, it doesn't work. They're actually quite healthy. You can eat all these things and be very tall and healthy. So that seems to be a dead end. The sort of Rambam's attempt to say that this is a way to promote health seems to be a dead end. And Central Hirsch offers us a different explanation. This is now in the 19th century in Germany. He wrote this in German. Let us now attempt to glance at these dietary laws by making use of the classification given by the Torah in order to get an overall picture. The task of the body should be to act as the messenger of the world to man and of man to the world. Okay, our intermediary with the world is our bodies. Okay, moreover, the body of man should be the servant of his spirit. This, right? So we are truly defined not by our body. It's a very strong, like sort of mind body or soul body divide in this passage. Who we are is not our bodies, but our bodies are subject to who we really are. This task the body can best perform if it is not too active in a carnal direction, if it is passive and indifferent to its own desire, and if it is submissive to the demands of the soul. Okay, so body should be not, the mind is in charge, the spirit's in charge, not the body. Anything which gives the body too much independence or makes it too active in a carnal direction brings it nearer to the animal sphere and thereby robs it of its primary function to be the intermediary between the soul of man and the world outside, bearing in mind this function of the body and also the fact that the physical structure of man is largely influenced by the kind of food he consumes. One might come to the conclusion that vegetable food is the most preferable, as plants are the most passive substance. Indeed, we find that in Jewish law, all vegetables are permitted for food without discrimination. And so the foods that we eat, right? So our bodies should be very chill and mellow and passive. So we eat things that don't move, right? Make like a tree and run. Okay, so we eat things that stay still, because that's what our bodies just kind of stay there and do what we tell them to. And then the animals we eat animals that eat vegetables. We don't eat carnivores, right? We eat animals that are slow and kind of domestic and calm, because we want to be slow and domestic and calm, and that's sort of the okay. So an updated version of that is Jacob Milgram, who was a academic. I think he may have also been a congregational rabbi at a conservative synagogue in Philadelphia, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not remembering correctly. Do you? Yes, who was Jacob Milgram? Was yeah.
This
Yeah.
Source. The idea of population strange.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's not. It's not. It's very different, because he's saying it's the first source. It's that it's sort of arbitrary what's kosher and what's not kosher. The point is to have limits. And the first is saying no, we want to eat things that are consistent with making our bodies kind of mellow and subservient to our souls. If we were to eat whatever dogs, or we would be wild and uncontrollable. We'd be, we wouldn't be able to, it would change our morals. You are what you eat. Exactly. So we eat, if we ate, yeah. Okay. So Jacob Milgram, he wrote the commentary on Leviticus, the Anchor Bible. Anchor Bible is an academic commentary on the Bible. When I worked at Princeton Hillel, there was a frum guy who came for Shabbos once, and he was very upset that we had an Anchor Bible full set of Anchor Bibles in the Hillel library. And he was so upset, he actually smuggled them out and threw them in the dumpster, we think. But he was real Amaretz, because he threw out the New Testament, but he left the Old Testament Anchor Bible, which was where all the real heresy is, right? Because that's he didn't realize that. Anyway, so but Jacob Milgram wrote the Leviticus. The volume of Leviticus is like twice as big as any other volume, and Jacob Milgram's comment on Leviticus is a masterpiece. And here is what he says in Parshat Shemini. In sum, we see that the Bible decrees that blood is life. Human blood may not be spilled, and animal blood may not be ingested. Israel is enjoined to observe an additional safeguard. Blood of sacrificial animals must be drained on the authorized altar. The rationale is now clear. The human being must never lose sight of the fundamental tenet for a viable human society. Life is inviolable. It may not be treated lightly. Mankind has a right to nourishment, not to life. Hence, the blood, the symbol of life, must be drained, returned to the universe, to God. This is the Ramban, but in modern language. He then says, follow a few pages later, hence, if account is taken of the permitted animals, excluding game, which was available only to hunters, the inventory reads as follows: cattle, sheep, goats, several kinds of fish, pigeons, turtle doves, several other non-raptorial birds, and locusts. The net result is self-evident. The Israelites choice of animal food was severely circumscribed. This conclusion provides the needed piece to complete the reconstruction of the rationale for the dietary system. Its purpose is to teach the Israelites reverence for life by 1, reducing his choice of flesh to a few animals, 2, limiting the slaughter of even these few permitted animals to the most humane way, and 3, prohibiting the ingestion of blood and mandating its disposal upon the altar by burial as acknowledgement that bringing death to living things is a concession of God's grace and not a privilege of man's whim. This is also a little bit like the Ramban, but it's not about it's a little bit, it's mixed from all of these things, right? You see, but he puts it together, distills it, I think, in a very nice way. That's Milgram. Okay, we're going to pivot now. Two more approaches. Part 3. This is an idea I found in an essay that Dr. Meir Soloveichik, his name is spelled wrong here. He's from the Chicago branch of the Soloveitchik family. There's no T in Soloveitchik in Chicago, so that's a mistake on this source sheet. Okay, Dr. Meir Soloveichik is from the Chicago branch of the Soloveitchik family. He's a congregational rabbi now, and he's sort of like a modern Orthodox public intellectual. He's gotten involved in some like political stuff, which I don't know. I think like a lot of people, I think if he had stuck with a Jewish scholarship, I think that was like better stuff. But anyway, this is like a very good essay he wrote, and he says he believes that the fact that there is no discernible rationale for kashrut is the point, but not in a sense of self-control, as we saw in source 1, but to kind of emphasize the significance of non-explained choices. Okay, so he writes, the laws of kashrut, in other words, while having had an important impact on the life of the Jewish people, have never really been understood. No clear explanation has ever been given for why one may eat of the cow, but not the camel, of the carp, but not the catfish, of the turtle dove, but not the turtle. In what follows, I will suggest that perhaps the Bible does not elaborate on why these distinctions are made, because it is less interested in our understanding God's reasons for choosing these specific criteria than it is in our comprehending the larger importance of making such distinctions among all forms of life. Indeed, the careful reader of the Bible and its rabbinic interpretations will see that later on in Leviticus, the Bible does make it quite clear why keeping kosher is important and why the Jewish dietary laws continue to be relevant. Okay, so Vayikra chapter 20. Yom Lechem Atem Tirshu Et Ani Hashem Elokechem Asher Nibdalti Etchem Min Ha'amim. I am Lord your God who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore distinguish between clean beasts and unclean, between unclean birds and clean. And you shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by bird, by any manner of living thing that creeps around, when I have separated from you as unclean. And you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples. You shall be mine. So in Leviticus 20, the distinction of animals between kosher and non-kosher is compared to the distinction between Jew and Gentile in this passage. So God's saying, I have identified certain things you can eat and certain things you can't eat, just as I have given you a special role to play in the world. So that's Meir Soloveitchik's big kind of focusing on. But this is really noticed already in the New Testament in Acts chapter 10. This is the story where they're going on this journey, and Peter went up, and he gets this trance, and he sees the heavens open, and this giant picnic, whatever sheet comes down, and the corners open up, and it's covered with all sorts of food, all sorts of animals and creeping things and birds of the air. And rise, Peter, kill and eat. But he said, I can't. I've never eaten anything that's common or unclean. And the voice came to him again the second time. What God has cleansed, you must not call common. This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up once to heaven. And Peter opened his mouth and said, truly I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. To him, all the prophets bear witness that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness and sincerity with his name. While Peter was still saying this, the Holy Spirit fell on all who heard these words, and the believers from among the circumcised who came with Peter were amazed because the gifts of the Holy Spirit had been poured out even on the Gentiles. So it's very explicit here, right? Like God saying in the book of Acts, go eat anything, is linked to Peter realizing, oh, I guess it doesn't really matter if you're Jewish or not. And all of a sudden, all of these Gentiles start prophesying at that moment. So it's actually this is like the big chiddush of Christianity. I think this is like the powerful idea. Christianity is this sort of universal equality of all people, and the universal equality of all people is introduced by the universal equality of all foods. And so, which is a response to Vayikra Kaf, which says, don't eat the things that I say you can't eat because I've separated you from all other people. And Meir Soloveitchik says, even as it's obvious to both Jew and non-Jew that in choosing some animals and others, we are reminded of God's choosing the Israelites from among the families of the world, the criteria employed in making these choices, hooves, leaping legs, and scales, remain unexplained. Even as the Jew expresses his chosen status, he remains mystified by the method of expression. In this way, the laws of kashrut inspire not arrogance, but humility. For even as the Jews are informed that they are the chosen of God, they are immediately reminded they are not themselves gods. They are elected, not omniscient, utterly unlike the Almighty who chose them. It's arbitrary. What's kosher, what's not kosher is arbitrary, just as it's kind of arbitrary that God chose Abraham and God fell in love with Abraham and stuck with the grandchildren, right? Like it's sort of arbitrary, but we have this role. Like our selection is arbitrary, just as the selection of certain animals as kosher is arbitrary, but we embrace that choice. We embrace that distinction, and we try to live up to it.
What's the significance of leaping legs?
That's his translation of the species of chagavim that are kosher. They have hind legs that are for jumping. Yeah. You can get certified kosher locusts now.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not very much.
The mainstream hashgachas in Israel that are selling them. It's the protein for everyone. Protein of the future. Protein of the future.
I mean, there are certain shocking that locusts were in specifically for a time of famine. Whatever.
I'm not saying I've done it. Just
That might be
saying.
when you want to eat them.
Correct.
Well, maybe we're all. I don't know. It's as we're as we're trying to feed a growing population. It's a protein of the future. I'm saying okay. So yeah. Okay. Okay. One last idea. This is called this phenomenology of religion. This is from Soloveitchik with a T. Okay, from the Boston branch of the family. This is a passage. Spans 3 pages of halachic man, which to me also is very much. It's a very famous passage. So we'll look at it. Well, if you haven't seen it, we'll see it. We'll see it together now, and it. I think it makes it sort of once you sort of contemplate this perspective, it's sort of obvious that we would have dietary rules in the Torah. So, if you haven't read, yes, that's a good mnemonic for how you can remember which branch of the Soloveitchik family has, because Boston they write in the T, and the Boston Soloveitchiks have a T in their name, and yeah, very good, excellent, thank you. Halachic Man is published in 1944, I think, is in Hebrew Isha Halacha. It's translated to English 1982 as Halachic Man. I believe a new translation, updated translation, is being published now, or like about now. So by the same translator. When halacha, and he's contrasting this essay. The essay is contrasting the Isha Halacha with something, a character he calls Homo Religiosus. Homo Religiosus is like a spiritualist who tries to transcend the world and cleave to God and leave the world behind. The Isha Halacha, on the other hand, takes these halachic concepts and applies them on the universe. And that's sort of through Torah scholarship and through this sort of halachic man's perspective. Okay, so for example, when halachic man looks to the western horizon and sees the fading rays of the setting sun, or to the eastern horizon and sees the first light of dawn and the glowing rays of the rising sun, he knows that this sunset or sunrise imposes upon him anew obligations and commandments: the recitation of the morning Shema, tzitzit, tefillin, the morning prayer, etrog, shofar, hallel, and the like. Sunset imposes upon him those obligations and commandments that are performed during the night: the recitation of the evening Shema, matzah, the counting of the Omer, etc. The sunset on Sabbath and holiday even sanctifies the day. The profane and the holy are dependent upon a natural cosmic phenomenon, the sun sinking below the horizon. When halachic man chances upon the mighty mountains, he utilizes the measurements which determine a private domain, a rishut yachid, a sloping mound that attains a height of 10 handsbreadths within a distance of 4 cubits. When he sees trees, plants, and animals, he classifies them according to their species and genera. Many laws are dependent upon the classification of the species. He approaches existential space with an a priori yardstick with fixed laws and principles, precepts that were revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai, the imaginary bridging of a spatial gap less than 3 handsbreadths, that's called lavud, the imaginary vertical extension upward or downward of a partition, that's good asik, the imaginary vertical extension. Halachic man explores every nook and cranny of physical, biological existence. He determines the character of all the animal functions of man, eating, sex, all the bodily necessities by means of halachic principles and standards. There's no real phenomenon to which halachic man does not possess a fixed relationship from the outset and a clear, definitive a priori orientation. This is also a little bit of Kantian epistemology here that he's doing as well, right? It's these a priori concepts, constructs, is like which we can not our focus for today. The halacha encompasses laws of business, torts, neighbors, plaintiff and defendant, creditor and debtor, partners, agent, workers, artisans, bailies, etc., family life, marriage, divorce, chalitza, sota, conjugal refusal, the respective rights, obligations, and duties of a husband and a wife is clarified and elucidated by it. Halacha has fixed a priori relationship with the whole of reality and all of its fine and detailed particulars. Halachic man orients himself to the entire cosmos and tries to understand it by utilizing an ideal world which he bears in his halachic consciousness. All halachic concepts are a priori, and it is through them that a halachic man looks at the world. As we have said above, his worldview is similar to that of the mathematician, a priori and ideal. Both the mathematician and halachist gaze at the concrete world from an a priori ideal standpoint and use a priori categories and concepts which determine from the outset their relationship to the qualitative phenomenon they encounter. This is the thesis of halachic man. Like it's like a 112-page book. That's the thesis. Through the study of Torah, we clarify and determine and discern all of these concepts and definitions and categories, and we go out into the world and we apply them on the world. Okay, I mean, I think the see the setting sun up. Now, one day ends, next day begins. I can count the Omer. I can say Shema. Too late to daven mincha. It's day, whatever, whatever the thing is. Okay. I think from that, the sort of phenomenology of religion, meaning from the experience of the one who is like going through this life according to this worldview and with these practices, like how could there not be mitzvot relating to the food we eat, right? Like it's sort of, it would be odd for the Torah not to have rules and for halakha not to develop and expand and very, very detailed rules about what to eat, given the fact that all of natural existence, all of human social interactions, and all of these things have mitzvot and halakhic concepts that define them and describe them. So, like, of course, that would also be the case for the food we eat as well.
That suggests also that the rules are arbitrary, right? It doesn't matter almost what they are, as long as that there are rules, so that they so that we have this lens through which they're.
I don't think you have to. Anyone else want to answer that? Anyone else want to respond to that, or? I think that yes and no. I think it from the perspective of not necessarily, because from the perspective of we have rules for this, that, and the other thing, so we should have detailed rules about food as well. It could be arbitrary, but that doesn't mean it has to be arbitrary. Like there could be rationales for all of these things, but I don't think that it's not necessarily arbitrary. It might be arbitrary, at least from just from the sense of being comprehensive and having rules for this part of life as well, but it might also have some other significance too. Right? It's not contradictory to what Milgram says,
but to perform this function, this phenomenological function, it's not necessary.
I think that's true. I think it's not necessary for there to be a specific reason, and sometimes there's a whole within the literature and tradition of kind of articulating tamei mitzvot, like rationales and reasons for the mitzvot. There is a secondary question. There's one question of, is that endeavor valuable, or is it suspect, or when do we do it or not? That's like one conversation. There's a secondary conversation within those who engage in this endeavor of tamei mitzvot and developing, articulating rationales for mitzvot. There's a second question of whether or not the details of mitzvot have any rationale, Rambam famously says no to the latter. Rambam is very much in favor of Ta'ameh mitzvot as an intellectual enterprise and as a, right, he thinks that's how, we cultivate and show love. For if the mitzvot had no rationale, that makes God look foolish. And so this endeavor of understanding the mitzvot is actually, we're cultivating love of God when we do that, because we're showing to ourselves and to others that how good and wise and just God is for giving us a Torah that perfects the human soul and the human intellect and human society. But even Rambam thinks that the details are arbitrary, like the fact that it's the korban is 3 goats and 1 bull. It could be 3 bulls and 1 goat. That doesn't matter. There has to be a number. Some number of goats have to be offered as the korban. Like it has to be some. Pesach has to be some number of days, right? But whether it's 7 days or 6 or 3, like that's sort of arbitrary, just because something had to be selected. But the actual selection is not, right. Everyone we understand why celebrating Pesach is valuable for for the mission of the Jews to bring about an ordered world, but 7, 8, 10, 3 days long, that's just has to be a number, so it doesn't really matter which one.
So then you think that it's like noble to identify the reasons for arbitrary practices?
No, Rambam thinks they're not arbitrary. Rambam thinks, meaning he would say the endeavor for Rambam is only ignores the details, because the details are arbitrary. It's just
So he wouldn't try and find the Talmud for the arbitrary.
No, he would say Pesach is for this and Korbanot are for that, and but like the actual details he thinks are. Although I'll say something about the what? I'm sorry. Gebrachs, right. It's actually interesting. I'll say something about Rambam and Korbanot. There is, however, there's one detail because he does describe in Mishnah Torah. He describes all of the rules for the Korbanot, because he wrote like this comprehensive code of Jewish law, even for the mitzvot that were not, even for like the Beit HaMikdash and stuff. So he describes details. He includes in Mishnah Torah details of Korbanot that don't exist in the Torah, which were subsequently uncovered in like sectarian Dead Sea Scroll texts. It's unlikely that Rambam had access to these ancient texts. It's more likely that he intuited a kind of internal grammar of the Korbanot, and so he was able to kind of fill in that missing detail, because he sort of got the grammar of like, well, if it has to be 1 bull if it's 3 goats or whatever, it must be whatever detail it is, it must be that way. There's a scholar who's Naftali Mashley at the Hebrew University. He traveled to India and studied sacrificial rites in India to try to study this like grammar of sacrifices from the study, and he told me about this detail in the Rambam. So even though it's arbitrary, you still have a grammar, still have a pattern that you can anticipate.
Do you think that the proponents of these different approaches think that they're exclusive and this is the reason, or do you think that they're all good approaches, but they emphasize one more than the others?
I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not certain.
Not
Myself personally, I think they all seem valid, and you could.
Yeah, personally, I mean, I think that's I would just say about time and mitzvot in general as an endeavor of trying to think through rationales for mitzvot. I think I would just say I think it's important to have one's commitment to the mitzvot be separate from the intellectual enterprise of trying to think through the rationale. Like the commitment should be very stable. The rationale is about, maybe can help us live a more, maybe our spiritual life can be more rich if when I reach for my blue sponge, I'm like, I'm a compassionate person. I'm cultivating compassion, right? Like maybe that's like a value in like kind of having that awareness. Maybe another value is I'm cultivating my love of God, because as I'm doing this mitzvot, I'm realizing this is a wise, loving God gave me these mitzvot to perfect my intellect and to perfect society, right? So that I'm cultivating my love of God when I do it. But I just think but at the end of the day, my commitment has to be kind of stable, because if I all of a sudden I go to France and I'm like, oh gosh, these people are strong and healthy, and I was lied to my whole life, like you don't want your commitments to kind of to crumble when there's like a data that point that contradicts it.
What you were describing just before, is what was explained to me the reason for all the different Hasidic minhagim, that they were trying to have kavanas for very specific things, and this developed into all these details that they.
Yeah. It's all, I did once did a meditation workshop with about Hilchot Shabbos, where we were Aryeh Ben David is a teacher in Jerusalem. I don't know if you've ever, so he's phenomenal. He sat in yeshiva for 10 years. Then he's like, no one thinks about God. Like, how can we like bring some like God consciousness into our a service of God or mitzvah observance? So, and he's written some books, and he does these like Jewish spirituality workshops. They brought him into yeshiva when we were studying Hilchot Shabbat, and he had us like just think about like why do we put all our food on a plata? Because Chazal were worried that we'd be so flustered or anxious about serving warm food at our meals that we might stoke the fire to make things cook faster and break Shabbos. So they said you can't put things on the fire, even though it's already cooked. You have to have it on a blech, or you have to remove the fire, garfa katum. You have to, all of these halachot that are like that in our lives are your plata and your blech and your taped knobs. It's all about a lack of mindfulness, and he had to sort of meditate on mindfulness. And so when you see Friday afternoon all your food on your nice plata, everything's nice. It's not about, oh, look how frum I am, I have this plata. It's like I'm so untrustworthy that I might actually break Shabbos. That's why I have to set up my food this way so I don't ignite a fire. And because I'll say there were no ein shvut b'mikdash in the Beit HaMikdash. They were they didn't have all these rabbinic restrictions on Shabbat, because the Gemara says the Kohanim would just like remind each other to have this like real awareness. So we had us meditate on like what it means to like have this awareness that you're not, God consciousness and awareness that you're not going to make these kinds of mistakes. And it was very powerful. So I think it's possible like to kind of bring these mindfulness practices into some of the more technical mitzvah observances we have. I think that's beautiful. That's what a bracha is supposed to be, right? A bracha is a brief meditation before you do a mitzvah, so you realize what you're doing.
Well, I thought of the idea, make a bracha, you have a bite of food. The second bite of food, you don't make a bracha, but you can still have the bracha.
Beautiful. Very nice. Yeah, I heard Saul Berman. We'll end with this. It's going to go tomorrow. Saul Berman said that there's sort of been like this arms race or inflation in this like things we do for kavanah before mitzvah, that the bracha was invented by the rabbis, that we don't just do a mitzvah without realizing that we're going to talk to God in the second person. Baruch atah Hashem. We're going to speak to the Melech HaOlam and recognize that God sanctified us with this mitzvah. And then we're going to do the mitzvah. Like surely we would, have real kavanah for it. But then, like over time, we sort of became routine and became just like a thing that we just say. And so they added. Some people say, "Hineni muchan and mezuzah," right? The kaya mitzvah. I'm going to do the mitzvah, and then they say the bracha, and then and then even that didn't work. And now the Kabbalists added with fear and trembling, I'm going to reunite the fractured elements of the Godhead as I do this. But anything just becomes a liturgy. There's a movie came out a long time in the late 90s, an Israeli movie, Hesder, in English was called Time of Favor. Whatever. It was a movie was like the characters where it took place in a yeshiva at Hesder, like on a West Bank hilltop, but the actors were like not religious actors. And the main character is a scene where he goes into his rabbi's house and he takes a pickle from the pickle bowl, says a bracha, and eats the pickle. And I was told they had to shoot that scene like 20 times to get the actor to be able to like pick up the pickle and say the bracha in a kind of the degree of like casual nonchalance that would be like authentic, because he saw the script and he picked up the, he thought you would, like say the, like, no, you gotta say it like you, like say like you don't mean it, like say it like you. The other story like that, and this I promise, there's a story of a meal that Martin Buber attended, and they asked Martin Buber to lead Birkat Hamazon, and apparently it was a transcendent, he had an I-thou relationship with the bencher, with everyone at the table, and it was really beautiful. And then so he finished, and somebody just said, I can tell you don't say that every day. So, all right. Thank you for watching online. Thank you for being here in person. Everyone is invited and encouraged to stay for Mariv. Thank you.
Wow.